Well, good morning again, friends. We're so glad you're here in worship, or if you're worshiping online, we're so glad you're with us in that way. We are going to return to Luke this morning. We began our Advent series a couple weeks ago by asking, how does a weary world rejoice? How do we do that? And we've been walking through the Gospel according to Luke. We started at the very beginning of Luke with Gabriel's announcement that Zechariah and Elizabeth, they were going to have a child in their advanced years, and that they were to name this miracle baby John. Now, if you notice, if you look through Luke, Luke is going to flip back and forth between the stories of John being born and the stories of Jesus Christ being born. And so 2 weeks ago, we started with Zechariah and Elizabeth and the announcement that John was coming. And last week, Joe talked about the announcement that Jesus would be born to Mary. And so this morning, we're going to flip right back to Zechariah, right back to that first story of he and Elizabeth and the birth of John. But I want you to remember that the last time we looked at Zechariah, he had quite literally been struck mute because he refused to believe Gabriel's promise that he and Elizabeth were going to have a baby. He just couldn't believe it. He'd given up hope on that idea. He figured his prayers would never be answered, leading him to have a very significant failure of imagination. He just couldn't imagine that God could act in that way. And so Zechariah, he questions the angel. He says, I don't think this is going to happen. How are you going to prove this? And the angel says, all right, well, Zechariah, since you refuse to believe, you will be silent. You will not be able to speak until that baby arrives. And so this morning, as we re-enter the text, it has been 9 months. Silent months for Zechariah and Elizabeth. He's apparently been communicating on some sort of writing tablet, however, and that tablet will come up in today's text. But I want you to remember that there was not really just like paper available. This was not a journal or an iPad he had available to him. This was likely a really thick stone slab that they poured wax over. And so as he would write out messages to his wife, he could smooth out the wax until it wore off. It does seem clear, however, that he used this ancient wax iPad to communicate to Elizabeth, because she seems to know what happened in the temple that day. She seems to know what the angel said to her husband. She seems to know that they are to call this boy John. And so let's turn to our text this morning. I want you to hear the word of the Lord from Luke 1:57 through 66. Now, when it was time for Elizabeth to have her baby, she gave birth to a son. Her neighbors and relatives heard that the Lord had shown her great mercy, and they shared her joy. On the 8th day, they came to circumcise the child, and they were going to name him after his father Zechariah. But his mother spoke up and said, no, he is to be called John. And they said to her, there's no one among your relatives who has that name. Then they made signs to his father to find out what he would like to name the child. He asked for his writing tablet, and to everyone's astonishment, he wrote, his name is John. Immediately his mouth was opened and his tongue set free, and he began to speak, praising God. All the neighbors were filled with awe, and throughout the hill country of Judea, people were talking about all these things. Everyone who heard this wondered about it, asking, what then is this child going to be? For the Lord's hand was with him. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Now think about this. What a wild thing to have witnessed. No wonder that we're told that everybody around, their friends, their relatives, their neighbors, are absolutely blown away, amazed. To begin with, Luke seems to suggest that this whole pregnancy has been very hush-hush. Like Joe said last week, we are told that Elizabeth remained in isolation for a long time. Mary does indeed come to visit her and likely stays through the birth of John, but by the way Luke describes it, it's not like their friends or their neighbors or relatives even know what's going on until after John has been born. They heard about what happened. I mean, and we know Zechariah has clearly not been out like chatting people up about it. And so this remains pretty quiet. But John is born. to a post-menopausal woman that scholars think was at minimum in her 60s or 70s, maybe even older. And once everyone does hear that this has happened, they do rush to the house to rejoice with them, to celebrate, because clearly they're witnessing a miracle here. We're told that on the 8th day they come to circumcise the child, which is just their custom, and they all come together to celebrate. Circumcisions, they were kind of a big deal. This wasn't just a procedure that happened in the hospital. It was a chance for the whole family, the whole community to gather together and to mark their cultural traditions, their religious traditions, and to celebrate. And so this big family affair, everyone's gathered. The neighbors are there. The extended family is there, all for John's circumcision. But I want you to notice, Zacharias still can't speak. Isn't that interesting? I mean, we were told, right, that the angel tells him, you're going to be silent until all of these things have happened. But haven't all these things happened? John has been born. No, they haven't all happened yet. Because the angel also said, you are going to have a son, and you are to name him John. And so this baby has been born, but he has yet to be named. Elizabeth, she tries to tell everyone gathered that he did indeed already have a name. His name is John. But in those days, children were almost always named after a family member, likely the patriarch of the family, so the grandfather or the father. And so when Elizabeth says, no, his name is John, everybody's like, no one in your family on either side has that name. That can't be what you want to name this child. And so Zechariah, he grabs his writing tablet and he, to everyone's astonishment, writes, his name is John. And then to add to all the wonder of this miracle baby, all of a sudden, after 9 months of silence, Zechariah bursts out speaking. In fact, he bursts out in praise and in song. Next week, we're going to look at his song and Mary's too. But Luke closes this section by drawing our attention to everyone's reaction to what happened. Once again, there's more awe, there's more amazement. The neighbors were filled with awe, and throughout the hill country of Judea, people were talking about all these things. Everyone who heard this wondered about it, asking, what then is this child going to be? Filled with awe, filled with amazement. When is the last time you remember feeling awe? Think about it. How often do you allow yourself to be amazed? You know, awe can mean many things. Awe can be found staring at a star-lit sky on a clear, really dark night. Awe can be found seeing a child take their first steps, or on hearing Mozart perform live. Awe can come over you in prayer or in worship. It can be experienced standing at the top of Angel's Landing or on the bottom of the Grand Canyon, right? We might experience awe when someone forgives us when we failed. Or maybe your first experience of romantic love in high school or college. It can happen when we watch somebody give up their seat on a really crowded bus or subway. Or if you've ever been lucky enough to see a baby be born. Awe can mean many things. And while most of us, we know it when we feel it, I think awe can be a little bit tricky to define. Dr. Dr. Keltner, a psychologist at the University of Cal Berkeley, he describes awe this way. He says, the feeling of being in the presence of something vast that transcends your understanding of the world. Experiencing awe, it comes from what Dr. Keltner calls this perceived vastness, where you're suddenly really aware of just how small you really are. And at the same time, simultaneously, how deeply connected you are to everything in this massive cosmos and universe. When this happens to us, it serves to quiet our inner critic. It does. Author Sharon Salzberg writes that awe is the absence of self-preoccupation. I love that. When we experience awe, when we recognize the vastness of the universe, our tendency to focus on ourselves, not only does it just reduce, it just disappears. It does. We're literally too captivated by something else to fret about what's going on with us. Awe gets us out of our heads, gets us out of our own way, which all the experts argue is actually critical for our well-being, just like joy or contentment or love. The research actually shows that awe, it activates our vagal nerves. It helps to regulate all sorts of bodily reactions, all sorts of bodily functions. It calms down your nervous system. Awe slows your heart rate. It relieves digestion. It deepens your breathing. It triggers the release of oxytocin, which is that hormone that promotes trust and bonding between us. Awe has been shown to reduce feelings of anxiety and depression. Now, I am sure that none of this data surprises you, because I think we all probably know what it feels like to experience awe. It might take your breath away. It might drop your jaw. It might send a shiver up your spine or put goosebumps on your arms. But we all know from our own experience and from the research that awe, it settles us down. It calms us down. It roots us in reality. It helps us see. You know, I think probably most of us associate awe with these like dramatic, life-changing events. And surely the story of Zechariah and Elizabeth, it is one of those like dramatic, life-changing moments for them. But the truth is, awe can be part of our everyday, ordinary lives. It can. If we are paying attention, if we are curious, if we nurture our imagination. But friends, if we're moving too quickly, if we're distracted all the time, we're going to miss our experiences of awe. Our ordinary, everyday opportunities to be amazed, we won't even see them. I mean, think about this. When is the last time you properly marveled at the reflections of light and color found in the bubbles of dish soap while you were washing the pots and pans? How many of you have stopped to notice that the smell of baking bread, it can transport you to a different moment in time in your life? How many of you spend your time waking up in the morning watching the dust dance in front of your morning windows? What about the last time you got a cut on your hand? How many of you slowed down long enough to realize it's a miracle that your body knits itself back together? When's the last time you were caught up in the sound of somebody else's laugh? Or you slowed down long enough to bear witness to a coworker's act of courage? When's the last time your eyes filled with tears because the lyrics of a song grabbed you? Opportunities for amazement, they are everywhere if we will allow ourselves to be amazed. We've said it like several times today, but children do this so well. They've got this nailed. One author, Cole Arthur Riley, she even goes so far as to say, children are made of awe. I love that. Children are made of awe. They see awe everywhere because they're content to be in the present. They're paying attention in a way that most of us grown-ups, we're just not anymore. Riley argues that as most of us grow up, we leave awe behind in favor of the serious business of maturity. Any other grown-ups out there? Just me? Unfortunately, some mature folks, they almost refuse to be in awe after a while, focused only on what is wrong in the world, and seemingly incapable of rejoicing in what is still good, and what is still beautiful, and what is still true. But this feigned superiority, that foolishly assumes that words like childish and juvenile are derogatory terms, it comes at our own peril. It really does. We don't just lose our moments of awe. We lose our capacity to see. We lose our capacity to love. We lose our understanding and our wisdom, and we miss God all around us. The late Rabbi Abraham J. Heschel wrote this. He said, "Forfeit your sense of awe. Let your conceit diminish your ability to revere, and the universe becomes a marketplace for you. The loss of awe is the avoidance of insight. A return to reverence is the first prerequisite for a revival of wisdom, for the discovery of a world as an allusion to God." So how do we return to reverence, as Heschel says? I mean, for those of us who can admit that we are far too focused on the serious business of maturity, can we get our awe back? Can we get to the place where we rediscover the truth that actually joy is the serious business of heaven, as C.S. Lewis so beautifully writes? The good news is that yes, you can. You can get your awe back, but it does require your intention. It does require your presence. It requires your effort. You have to allow yourself to be amazed. Riley reminds us, awe is an exercise. It's both a doing and a being. It's a spiritual muscle of our humanity that we can only keep from atrophying if we exercise it habitually. I think this illustration might help. It's one I shared on our women's retreat a few months ago. How many of you guys have been here? You guys know what this is? This is Observation Point in Zion National Park. It's stunning. I've hiked here a few times, and as you can see, this is a really obvious place to experience awe. I wept the first time I stood there. I was sort of just blown away by that kind of beauty, that kind of grandeur. But here's the deal. I had to do some things in order to stand there, in order to experience this moment of awe. I had to make a conscious decision to go. I had to create time and space in my life. Even more, I had to hike several miles in order to stand there and have this moment. It required my effort and my energy and my time and my intention to experience the awe of Observation Point. But even still, all my efforts, they did not create this. I had nothing to do with this. No. Observation Point is entirely a gift from God. It exists in all its breathtaking beauty, no matter if I am aware of it and experience it or not. It stands there right now while we sit here today. It has always been stunning, and it has always been a gift, whether we notice or not. And so the question becomes, will we hike? Will we go? Will we place ourselves in a position to be able to recognize the gift of this mountain, this experience of awe? Because here is the thing, friends. Life is filled, absolutely filled with uncounted observation points. They are everywhere, all the time. The big, majestic moments, and then the ordinary, everyday moments, all with the potential to drop your jaw and to remind you of what is actually real. But it does require we slow down. It does require we pay attention and we live with purpose. Friends, I want you to understand that allowing yourself to experience awe, it's just not optional. You can't live without awe. You at least can't live very well without awe. Even more, you will really struggle to encounter God if you're unwilling to be amazed, if you're unwilling to embrace mystery. How does a weary world rejoice? It allows itself to be amazed. We allow ourselves to be amazed. Einstein wisely said, he said, there is only two ways to live your life. One is as though nothing is a miracle, and the other is as though everything is. Everything. And that's the truth, friends. And your life, it is indeed a miracle that you sit here today with breath in your lungs. It is a miracle. And even more, this Christmas story that we tell year after year, the one of miracle babies being born, the one of God becoming flesh and coming into the world to redeem all of humanity, the one with shepherds and angels and magi, you will not even be able to hear that story, much less understand it, if you are unwilling to embrace awe. But if you will intentionally step into the mystery, even if it feels foolish, even if you feel childish, if you will slow down and be present to the goodness and the beauty and the miracle of this life, well, then this story, it can be your salvation. This is what Paul meant when he writes, the foolishness of God, it is wiser than human wisdom. And the weakness of God, it is stronger than human strength. The message of Christ is foolishness to those who refuse to see it. But for those of us being saved, it is the power of God. Friends, the invitation for us today is to allow ourselves to be amazed, to allow awe to swallow us whole, and to embrace this story of salvation again this year. And not only in nostalgia, or even in gratitude for the ways that God acted in the past in human history. But we want to be presently in awe, drawing strength from our salvation history to help us remember again that God is actually still intervening. God is still arriving in unexpected places to unexpected people. People like you and like me, who maybe just like Zechariah, might be experiencing our own failure of imagination. Friends, God is alive. God is at work in this world. God is at work in you. Beauty and goodness and truth and love are all around if you will but have the eyes to see. Don't miss it this year, friends. Don't miss it. Slow down. Be present to your life. Be present to your God and watch for Christ to be born again. In her poem, When Death Comes, it's stunning if you've not read it before. Mary Oliver has this line. When it's over, I want to say all my life, I was a bride married to amazement. I was the bridegroom, taking the world into my arms. May it be so for you and me, friends. Amen.